Aloha, I'm Aaliyah Zimmerman, and this is News Behind the News. Our lawmakers are facing a $1.3 billion deficit, and they're looking everywhere for money, from you, from me, and from Hawaii's businesses. Today, I have Lowell Kalapa of the Tax Foundation of Hawaii, who is the best expert there is on taxes in Hawaii. No pressure, Lowell. And Kathleen Funk Linton, who's a realtor in Hawaii, who can talk about not only how this is impacting her business, but as well as the whole economy and the construction industry as well. Her family's in the construction industry. So I want to thank you today for coming, because this is such an important topic.
Wow, it's a biggie, and it's affecting everybody on all different kinds of levels. So, yeah.
Lowell, you are at the legislature all the time. I mean, you probably know that place inside and out more than almost anyone. And what are some of the proposals that have come up this year for tax increases?
Well, starting with the administration, the governor has proposed, taxing for the first time the pension income of our seniors. They've asked for a 50% increase in alcoholic beverage taxes. They've asked for a new fee on sugary beverages as a means to combat childhood obesity. And more specifically now, they have kind of taken under wing a legislative proposal to suspend the exemptions of the general excise tax that largely address the pyramiding of the tax. So there are a variety of things. Tax proposals that really don't benefit the general fund but shore up what we have pointed out for a long time is the failing highway fund, and there are proposals on the table to increase the motor vehicle weight fee by a penny per pound, which would, for an average car, increase that fee by about $36 to $40 per year. They would also increase the registration fee, which is now $25, by $20, so that would rise to $45 per vehicle per year. And more recently, the legislature has chimed in with a proposal to take $4.50 from what was designated for a car rental facility fund or program to build a coordinated car rental facility and designate it as the car rental surcharge, and taking the proceeds of the $4.50 into the general fund to help supplement the looming deficit they have to deal with.
So bottom line is nobody's special fund is ever safe, right?
Nobody's special fund is ever safe, and this is what we've criticized for years now, is that special funds seem to give security to the various programs that they benefit, but in the long run they become huge targets for a raid, and that's what's happening this year. The Senate sent over a bill to the House, and the House now has filled it with a list of amounts of special funds are going to raid, about $45 to $47 million, plus close down some other special funds. And that's another way that the legislature expects to fund that $1.3 billion shortfall. But that $1.3 billion shortfall is only for the fiscal biennium starting July 1st. We have a huge shortfall for the current fiscal year, the rest of the 3 months remaining in the 2011 fiscal year ending on June 30th, of somewhere around $300 to $330 million. That unless we can find that money or cut spending, we're going to have to close the doors of some of our state agencies.
Now, cut spending, Kathleen, is that one of the things? You're in real estate business, and you were saying before about your family is in construction, and you've been to the legislature to testify. So, what do you think should be happening down there?
Well, I did go to the legislature. I was scared to do it. I've never done anything like that, but I just think things have gotten out of control. I am a realtor, and as such, I'm an independent contractor. So my money, as it comes to me, is GE taxed right off the top, and then I pay my expenses off of those already taxed money that's coming to me, and then I get charged income tax. But as an independent contractor, I look at what things cost and what we pay other people that are in the government sector and think, wow, this is out of whack compared to what is happening to me as a private sector employee, being self-employed, and also as a private sector employer from the construction industry that my husband runs. And I look at, if you get 21 days a year in paid vacation and 21 days a year in paid sick leave, and then another 14 days of paid holidays, you're getting almost 3 months a year of pay for work that you're not performing. And in my situation, I get nothing. I have no paid vacation. If I want to take off, I actually have to pay somebody to fill in for me while I'm gone, or I work a lot from my vacations. And I just think there's kind of a disconnect between, government's function is to support the people, and yet it is funded fully and the money funnels from us to them. And yet the benefits that we're paying out and the things that are happening are giving more people to the place where my money is going than I'm getting myself. And I really see it as not connecting. I also see the loss of exemptions. Ultimately, it's going to hurt the consumer, because if we're paying more in fuel charges and car charges and shipping charges and loading charges, all of that gets passed on. And these tax exemption removals that you're talking about, what that is that's kind of hidden code for you and I, the end consumer, are just going to pay more for everything we do. And the construction exemptions that were taken away means that housing is going to cost more, which then turns around and impacts me in my real estate business. It's just kind of a huge
snowball.
Yes, thank you. Snowball effect of what's happening. And it just, where does it stop? And where does stopping and cutting spending fall into this equation? You can't just continue to tax people over and over again without reining in some of the expense that we have. It's a two-sided street, and I think it's going one way right now.
Lowell, for the people that don't understand general excise tax, which I find a lot of people don't, because they think it's a sales tax, or they don't understand. They say it's just 4 cents. It's just 4 cents, Lowell. Why are you complaining about general excise tax? Can you explain what is a general excise tax, and why is it so different from what other states
Malia,
have?
By comparison to the retail sales tax that you would find in California, where a lot of people go and visit, or Illinois or New York, it is a gross receipts or gross income tax on everything, every transaction. So that means it's not only on the sale of goods at retail, but it's also on the sale of services at retail, and it's also on sales at wholesale. So albeit a 0.5% rate or a lesser rate than the 4%, depending on how many times those goods or those services change hands, the 0.5% adds to that cost. Secondly is the fact that because it's not just a retail sales tax on goods, you have to account for what other people don't pay on services in some of those retail sales tax states. When you try and convert the structure of the gross receipts tax to retail sales tax and produce the same amount of money, which is about $2.4, $2.6 billion, in order to generate that money with a retail sales tax structure, you would need a rate of somewhere between probably 11 and 12%, which would make this retail sales tax for Hawaii the highest rate in the nation. And if it went up to 5 cents, as had been proposed in the Senate bill, the equivalent probably would be on the order of about 16 to 17%, mainly because the tax does still pyramid, even though we tried to address that. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that if you go to California, you own a house and you call the plumber up and say, come out and fix my flooded sink or whatever, that repairman has no sales tax on his services. The counterpart here in Hawaii, the plumber does pay a 4% general excise tax on his services. So when you add the services back in, which accounts for roughly 60% of our tax base, that's how you get to the 10, 11% minimum. And then you have to add back in a 0.5%, which is on wholesale sales, which is not present in the sales tax state. They only tax the consumption, the final consumption at retail.
So we're taxing food too, right?
I was just going to bring that up, right?
That's a necessity. It's a must-have,
right? And other states don't do that, right?
Yeah.
And I know we have medical bills. Are those taxed still?
Services, they're all services.
All services, right.
There's nothing that's really generally exempt. And not that, we should exempt food or medical services. One of the beauties of a good tax system is its broad base. Mm-hmm. And so, often we get this proposal coming along, well, we should exempt medical services. And I'm saying, well, exempt medical services, how is that a priority next to the auto mechanic that repairs the doctor's car? Mm-hmm. That's just as a crucial service too. So when you have a broad base like that, It allows a lower rate, and certainly all transaction taxes, be it a retail sales tax or a gross receipts tax, is regressive. I mean, it bears a heavier burden on the lower income family than the higher income family, because the lower income family, 100% of their budget is subject to taxable transactions. And so you address that issue by granting credits through the income tax to those people who are truly in the low income categories to help offset the tax on food and drugs and medical services.
Now, Kathleen, one of the things I was struck by when you were testifying at the legislature was when you talked about the construction industry and how you talked about the removal of these tax exemptions, which Lowell can probably give a little bit better, but some businesses have tax exemptions because they get taxed maybe twice or three times if you have subcontractors. But maybe you can explain that a little bit more from your experience, how that works.
Well, I'm not in the ins and outs and daily of our company, but I do know that margins are very thin, jobs are not being awarded. I know that we are laying people off still. So the economy is trying to come around, but it isn't there yet. And my main point to the legislature was that we are not on stable, solid ground, and we are still in this state where we are letting people go because the jobs to follow the big jobs that we've had are not there. And any kind of increase in what we have to pay can cause us to become that much more unstable. And so that was really my big point there. The exemptions, if you don't, they're kind of a disincentive, though, to go off island to buy certain products if it levels the playing field by removing an exemption from buying it locally and versus buying it from out of state. So that is a concern to me. But my biggest concern is that we need to get stable. We need to get the jobs coming back into Hawaii, and with more and more charges, big jobs are getting put off. They're getting pushed back. Now, the way I understand the exemption removal to work is that if you sign a contract before a certain date this summer, then those jobs will not be affected by this tax. If I'm understanding that correctly.
Right. There's a transitional clause in the bill.
So it will at least push that back out, but I still think the real key is that we are just taking temporary measures that won't resolve anything over the long run. And it is a broad-based tax, so that's the good thing about it it is broad-based. But if we still can't spend within our means, then we're just going to have to continuously raise that tax.
Well, I think the tax situation that she's talking about is on contractors and subcontractors who, in this day and age, and because of all the rules and regulations that we have and agreements with the various trade unions, so much of the work is now specialized. So a general contractor just can't go in and do the whole job by herself or by himself. That in fact they do have to contract with specialty contractors or subcontractors to put in your kitchen cabinets. That's a separate specialized contractor. To put then the countertops in, which may be granite, corian, or whatever, that's a specialty contractor, so that's a subcontract. And then to put actually the plumbing equipment in, that's a specialty contractor. So subcontracting is not unique. It's common to all construction projects. And what happens is that the general gets paid. He signs the contract with the customer or the home builder or even government. He gets paid $1 million. Out of that, say about $300,000 goes to the subcontractor for kitchen installation. Subcontractor then subcontracts with the tile setter and with the cabinet maker and so on. Under the current system, the general contractor pays 4% on the $700,000 and pays over the $300,000 to the main subcontractor. The main subcontractor keeps, say, $150,000 for his work and pays 4% on that, but then turns the $150,000 over to the tile setter. The tile setter pays 4% on, 0.5% on that, 4% on that, excuse me, but only on the $150,000. The subcontractor only $150,000. Under the suspension of these exemptions, the general will now pay 4% on the entire $1 million contract. Mm-hmm. He will then turn around, give $300,000 to the main subcontractor. The main subcontractor will pay 4% on the entire $300,000. So now that $300,000 has been subject to the 4% twice. And when it's paid over in a $150,000 increment to the cabinet maker or the tile setter, that person will pay another 4%. So that $150,000 will have been subjected to a 4% rate 3 times.
And that basically will raise the cost of the house
Absolutely
or the building,
will.
right?
And you're talking about subcontractors. In my business as realtor, and there are thousands of realtors and other service people like me, the same thing happens regardless. I mean, the exemption doesn't even apply to us, so it happens to us always, and now it's going to happen to additional kinds of businesses, and it will make that cost of housing go up in the market. And it's just a tax upon a tax upon a tax.
And what is ironic is when you juxtapose that against some of the other legislation, tax legislation that the legislature is considering. For example, they want to award a Ohana residential tax credit for the construction and purchase of a new home of up to $6,000 or 2% of the purchase price, because you know what, the construction industry is hurting. They're on the bench. We need to get them back to work because they're one of the generators of a lot of money in our economy, and yet they turn around and want to suspend this general excise tax exemption, which helps to stimulate construction activity. So you kind of look at the legislators and say, which end do you want up, and what do you expect is going to happen when you take away this exemption or treatment of the contractor-subcontractor relationship? It's just going to raise their costs, and people are going to stand back and say, I'm not going to pay that price. Why should I buy a new home? And therefore, their little Ohana residential tax credit is not going to work. And so instead of creating jobs, you're destroying jobs.
So what about some of the other exemptions that are on the chopping block? We have Hawaiian Airlines, which gets an exemption from the GE tax because it says it needs to compete with the other airlines, and the other airlines don't pay it. The Matson has an exemption. What are some of the bigger exemptions that will have an impact on people when they're removed?
Well, when you refer to Hawaiian Airlines, there's an exemption for the lease rent that Hawaiian Airlines pays an out-of-state lessor for their aircraft as well as their aircraft engines, partly because, as you know, for a while there, Hawaiian Airlines leased almost all of their fleet until they could amass enough capital to begin a buying program. Well, all of those leases, all of the rent they pay on the lease of an aircraft will be subject to 4% should the suspension take place. That's only going to raise the cost of a ticket, or if they can't sell tickets at that price, Hawaiian Airlines is going to have to eat that, and that means probably less flights, lay off people, and it's going to create the economic dislocation. Another one is stevedoring. Stevedoring affects all of us, and that's why when these exemptions were characterized as special interests, because these are specific businesses, stevedoring activities, which is the loading and unloading of cargo on either aircraft or ships, is currently exempt. And that's out of recognition that 98% of the stuff we consume here in Hawaii come over our docks or through our airports. When you add 4% to the cost of that loading and unloading activity, it has to be recaptured and passed on to the customer, and ultimately at retail to me as the purchaser of a box of cereal, a bag of rice, whatever, in the supermarkets. And I'm not going to blame the legislature because I'm seeing it on the shelf price. So I'm going to blame the grocer. You're gouging me, you're raising your prices, this is ridiculous, but it's because the tax has now been reimposed on stevedoring activities. So that's another one that we really kind of look at and go, it's not special interest, it's general interest. It'll affect all people here in this state, and it'll increase the cost of living. And when we talk about economic impact, all that means is that more money will be going for the goods and services we purchase because the tax has now been reimposed, and there is less discretionary funds of a family that can go for other activities, going out to eat, going to the movies, all of which then begins to hurt the labor market that serves those particular activities. So, if we don't go for pizza once a week like we used to, that means the pizza shop owner is going to say, well, I really don't need that waiter or waitress, or I don't need that extra chef because now I'm selling 25% less pizzas. So now somebody gets laid off. That's one more person that then goes on unemployment and ultimately ends up on welfare if their unemployment runs out. So It's a negative economic impact, and this is something that I think lawmakers need to take into account when they're so obsessed with just raising the money to keep state operating, is that there is a negative downside, if you will, to raising taxes.
Yeah, I think down at the legislature we see the social service advocates, the nonprofits that get contracts or money. You see the businesses that get money from the state, but there's not too many people down there, except for Lowell is down there, but that are actually down there for the taxpayer, the average taxpayer. And I think these people walk the halls every day talking to lawmakers about why you should help this prisoner or this child, or the education system, and so on. And there's lawmakers that have been elected that really believe you should pay more money, and you should pay more money, and I should pay more money. So how do you counter that, Lowell, with that kind of culture down there?
Well, I think that I do empathize with the social service providers, the healthcare providers, but I think they are locked in step to the way it was in delivering those services, that they need to begin to look at a shift in the paradigm from merely handing out and supporting to one that empowers our families who are distressed with the kind of tools, the kind of skills that they will need to be self-sufficient. And I think we're beginning to see this with Father Mark's effort to get the homeless off the streets, but then also to give them the skills so they can go and get a job. And I think everybody would agree that everybody needs to be a contributor in some way. Yes, there are people who are dependent on government who cannot help themselves, the disabled, the elderly, and so on. But there are many who are capable of securing a job and securing an income, but they need to be given the skills. So the paradigm shift, I think, in government needs to move from kokua, or just handouts, I'm helping you, to what we know in Hawaiian as kako'o, which is to support, so that these families can gain the skills to be contributing members of our community. And this has not changed for years. And there are things that we can do to help those in distress at this time to actually gain self-esteem. The current system of social welfare in our state, I think, does not lend itself to restoring self-esteem to many of these families who have fallen on bad times. You look at our public housing stock, it is deplorable, because there is no recognition that these people don't know how to live in housing, or may not have the skills to understand that housing is critical to their survival, and therefore they need to respect it. The last administration made the effort to move public housing to social services, but it stopped right there. We believe that the support services for people in public housing is a necessary paradigm shift, so that those families really are capable of moving out in a couple, 2-3 years and making room for others who may be standing in line for public housing. So again, it's a paradigm shift, it's a restructuring of government, but without losing heart. I think that we are doing a great disservice to those who are in need by not empowering them with the skills that they need to become contributing members of the community.
Mm-hmm. What about, so in terms of, say, other things going on at the legislature that might impact business, or your business, for example, or you as a taxpayer, what are you seeing in terms of challenges for your business? Or Lowell, what are you seeing there that's going to impact the economy? You're talking about new taxes for vehicles. We saw the sugar tax, the alcohol tax, the pension tax, and on and on and on and on. I mean, just
Right.
the pension tax alone will impact a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, and even at the federal level, I know we're looking at like mortgage interest deduction. I mean, you talk about home ownership and trying to get people, we're talking about two different things, obviously, but I mean, it's just one more step that makes it that much harder for somebody to get into their own place if that is taken away as well.
Well, he's talking about housing, so
Right.
there you go. That another barrier to getting into
Right.
to housing after you're in
Right.
affordable housing.
Well, and as qualifications get harder and harder to come by because you have less and less income left after you're paying these higher taxed items, then you do have less money, and that's part of the regressive nature of it, is that it does affect lower income people more because it's a larger percentage of their household budget that's going to things that are taxed. And savings doesn't get taxed as consumer goods do. So if there's a disparity in how much you can save because you're taking more and more of your total household income away, then you don't have any money left to set aside to qualify for something. So.
And if you're layering another tax, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, I don't think even the president understands. If you recall, several months ago, he went out to the business community, the American Chamber of Commerce, I think it was, to urge businesses to reinvest in the economy, get the economy moving, because they're still sitting on trillions of dollars of, cash. And what he doesn't understand is that the business community doesn't have certainty. They don't have confidence because the policies that are coming out of Washington, D.C., the policies that are coming out of our state legislature makes the economic outlook very tenuous. Should I or should I not reinvest monies when taxes might go up? Or, they're going to lay another regulation on me, or they're going to, cost me another $1 million because I'm going to enter into this investment. That is holding back the business community from reinvesting in the economy until we get some certainty out of our public policymakers at all levels, federal, state, and county. I don't think we're going to see the private sector willing to let go of that money. And that goes for families too. Unless they have some certainty they're going to have a job, that they're going to have an income, they're going to hold back because next week they may not have a job. And that's what we saw right after the downturn in 2008, the crash of the market. People suddenly kind of tightened up and said, ooh, I don't think we're going to be able to buy that house.
I think that's very true. I know just personally, one of the things that has kept us going is that we don't have a lot of personal debt and we don't have a lot of business debt. So we're not prepared to go out and spend money that we may not have a way of paying back. And so it's true, for us in our own home, and we have plans that we have drawn up 2 years ago to do an expansion and to just update our home, which we have a nice home, but it's pretty modest by most standards. And yet we don't want to go into more debt to pay to fix it up. The same thing is true at work. And I think it's also true for just the economy as a whole in the housing industry, because we're not seeing people who want to move up because they don't know what's going to happen. They don't move down. They're afraid that if they sell now, maybe they won't get as much as they could if they waited. But they're, people are afraid to move forward. They're afraid to move forward. And I can say that even I personally, am waiting on some things until we know that things are a little bit more stabilized.
I can't believe it. We're already out of time. Yikes. But people can log on to your website,
tfhawaii.org,
for more information. And thank you for joining us today. We have so much more. We should do another show. Thank you. This has been News Behind the News. Aloha.
Aloha.